Richard. Welcome to the seminar. Thank
Good
you
morning,
for your
George.
time and your contribution, which we look forward to hearing. So I'll pass over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, well, here's something that in old Blue Peter fashion I prepared earlier, and I'll ask Gary to press the button. But just picking up on some of the issues that Sean and Don were describing, I think I fit that grey-haired filing cabinet role very well, and thanks for the compliment on that particular process. Gary, I'll ask you to run VT.
Thank you very much, Richard. We'll come back to you later. Thank you.
Okay, good morning and welcome to my session on the Build Back Better seminar, a very important seminar in this particular time of the year and in terms of the century is where we are. So let me introduce myself, what I'm going to discuss. My name is Richard Hayes. I'm not the appointed speaker for this particular event. It was Steve Spender, our current CEO, but being a past president and a former CEO, I feel I've got enough information and experience to be able to take this issue forward. And I also speak as a member of the IHE construction panel, IHE being the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, and where we look at the current new subjects that are being put forward for qualifications and the things like the Trailblazers and the new T course, which I'll speak a little bit about as we go through the event. Starting off really with the issue about our current skills base, and I'll then lead on to some of the challenges that we face at the moment. Speak a bit about diversity, which isn't perhaps as obvious as you think it would be in that process. How engineering will move forward in the 2020s, the third decade of the century already, and some possible solutions and things that we can do as individuals and as organisations to take the industry forward in very challenging times. Our good old friend Boris, many weeks ago, has talked about build, 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 and build back better is probably just as important a little phrase as he was trying to say. There's going to be a huge amount of infrastructure and other development built by the United Kingdom, and really are we able to do that process, bearing in mind where we are in terms of the crisis with the pandemic, and also with Brexit, and what is more important to the industry ourselves is our skills and competency issue that we really need to address very quickly. Several years ago, when the National Infrastructure Plan was published by the previous governments, it was said then that we'd require to be increasing our skills within our construction sector. But the pipeline of work that was planned over 5 years ago would demand something towards another 250,000 construction workers and 150,000 engineering workers. That would mean that we'd need probably 100,000 more workers by the present day. About 250,000 of the existing workforce would need to be trained and upskilled. I'm not entirely sure whether they've actually achieved any of those particular targets at all. But we are where we are. Our esteemed colleagues in the Royal Academy of Engineering also suggested that we might need something like another 1 million engineers and technicians across the whole realm of engineering, not just including civils, highways, traffic and the like, by this present time. But again, woefully short of those targets, I think, if you look at the stats that are in that process. 5 years on, some of the challenges that we faced within the sector are still there, and we still need to meet those challenges. Boris's investment in UK infrastructure announced last year and part of his process to rebuild the economy this year has some significantly ambitious targets for our economic infrastructure, including obviously transport, local growth, the massive decarbonisation agenda, the probably still burgeoning digital infrastructure market, which I think is probably our biggest growth area as we go forward, and how we pay for some of the infrastructure and issues that we want to try and develop. But having experienced the impact of COVID-19 this year, economy is probably in a much weaker state than it was in 2015. And certainly as far back as 2008 when the first recession kicked in. But the government's challenge to drive just towards building back better becomes an increasingly more difficult objective to achieve. But as a whole, the industry itself generates a significant amount of money for the economy. £117 billion in 2018, about 6 or 7% of what the government's gross domestic product of the UK economy is. And yet, despite that amount of money within the sector, we still face the problem of recruitment, something up to 20% of vacancies, because we haven't got the right skills, the right qualifications, and often the experience from the incoming cohort. Construction as a career for young people is a massive issue. And I'll look at some of that a little bit later on. But of course, to get young people into construction, we have to start very early with that process. And again, I'll talk about that slightly later on. Some people will argue that some areas of our engineering projects, such as HS2, Crossrail and the nuclear power stations, will attract other individuals who want to come into the industry, much more than perhaps they would do to repairing potholes, traffic lights. But overall, we still struggle from a ridiculously low gender gap. Our black and ethnic minority groups are also underrepresented. And of course, over the whole profile of our professionals, quite a lot of them, coming over 22%, are over 50. And like myself, 15% are now over 60. And despite being urged to stay back in the industry, some of us want to do something a bit more easy, but without the talent coming through and following us behind, some of those things are going to be a struggle for us to actually leave the industry and know that it's been well looked after. And one final point on Brexit, which occasionally does get mentioned, it's about the recruitment of overseas talent. We have for many, many years always brought in people from overseas to work in our construction industry. Whether that is from Far East, from India, Pakistan areas, other parts of the world, that's always been a great source of skills and individuals for us to work in our sector. We still really don't know how that will be challenged by the new Brexit rules and immigration rules. One would hope that lots of our business and immigration partners will look at that very carefully, but let's do hope that we are able to still employ people with an overseas background. Otherwise, the problems that we're going to talk through perhaps are going to be slightly greater than we anticipated. Some of the stats that we look at, and I'm going to just quickly look at these. A briefing paper by the House of Commons that was published at the end of last year talks about how industry works, what its statistics are, how it's being managed, and how much value it brings to the industry, to the country itself. And we can see over this particular period of time that new orders and increase in orders over the last, 60 years or so, it's been fairly positive for the vast majority of those particular years. Some years do sort of drop out. 73, I think, probably something to do with the number of strikes in that particular year. The late 80s, and certainly the 2008-9 process. 2018, again, for all the reasons, has always been a very poor year. But generally, there is quite a lot of work in construction throughout the United Kingdom, which gives us hope that the sector can actually become a career for many people. Excuse me, not something they just drop in and out of. 6.6% of all jobs, and that's over 2.4 million people, are employed in construction. What's also interesting is 36% of workers in construction are self-employed, against what we might call an average across the rest of the United Kingdom's economy is about 13%. Excuse me. So that gives quite a lot of people SMEs and below, a big interest in how the organisations running construction and highways develop talents and skills. And it's not just down to the big boys to keep this particular industry running. One other concern, I mentioned this earlier on, is that the employment rates for people getting towards 67, the new retirement age fairly soon, there is this so-called demographic time bomb. And if the skills shortage is bad enough in 2020, by 2035 it's going to be even worse. So this chap might well be knocking at your door the next few weeks or so. But vacancies are there. I just did this quick snapshot from the Indeed website last week, and there were 624 different vacancies for highway engineers just in one particular swipe at the network. So there are plenty of jobs out there, and the salaries are not that bad. Salaries are pretty competitive compared to some other industries. So, you know, there are plenty of jobs if people are prepared to take them on. As I mentioned earlier on, our image and our reputation are a challenge for us as we always go through. The guys on the left, perhaps slightly now dated sort of views on things. The guys on the far right, health and safety completely ignored. And the guy in the middle, well, would you let him build your house? I suppose I'll leave that one to you at this stage. But in terms of gender, I just wanted to have a look at how we dealt with gender, because looking at registrations for people who become professionally qualified, this is really just a very quick snapshot of the process. So the numbers of people who've come forward in the last 3 years to be registered as engineers, the total on the far right-hand side suggests that we're only really bringing about 10% of all females of all registered through. A woefully, woefully small percentage of the actual workforce through that particular process. And it may be at this particular stage, I'll show you a short video just to try and perhaps share my views on how the industry is perceived and how it could be perceived in other areas.
Hey, darling, you have yourself a lovely day. Oi, that colour really works on you. Have a productive day. You want to hear a filthy word? Gender bias. Absolutely. Yes. I know, huh? Yeah. I'd like to show you the respect you deserve. Yeah, well said. A woman's place is wherever she chooses. I appreciate your appearance is just one aspect of who you are. You know what I'd like to see? A society in which the objectification of women makes way for gender-neutral interaction, free from assumptions and expectations. Right. You go, girl. Oh, yeah. What do we want? Equality. What don't we want? Misogyny. What do we want? Equality. What don't we want? Misogyny.
Apologies to Snickers for that particular little advert. The second video I want to play .
My name's Max. I've been a nanny for about 5 years. I've worked with big kids and now I'm actually working with a baby.
Hi everyone, I am Najwa and I am an engineer. So sometimes I actually go to site.
Hi, so I'm Michaela. I'm a computer programmer. So that means I build websites and apps and computer programs.
So I'm a bus driver and I've been driving for nearly 17 years.
Hello everyone, my name's Nick and I'm a nurse.
I am a ballet dancer with the Royal Ballet.
So who wants to be an engineer? Good.
So as I said earlier, the construction industry is not particularly diverse at the moment. Bandy some numbers around about the number of people registered as engineers and technicians. The overall figures that we saw statistics here are around 12.5% of women and 7.2% of black and I think minority people within our industry. So it's a huge, huge amount of work to be done to bring these people into the industry. And it's not bringing people in for the sake of it, it's bringing people from a different pool who will add value to what we do, because diversity often means employing people from different backgrounds, but different views on the way that we operate. And there are some significant values if we bring these differences into our working environment. We will need different skill sets as well as we move forward. And often some of these people do have that ability to blend into our particular organisation. Cultural diversity is fairly well said before. It's centred around race and religion, age, sex and gender, sexual orientation and disability. And we should be, wherever possible, completely biased against any of those particular issues. And the skills we need to be flexible and accommodate some different lifestyles. We certainly found during the pandemic that the ability to work in a different environment, a different workstation and different situation is acceptable to many people and preferred by many people. And that this does, as we go forward, change the way that workstations, work environments and whatever will be in the future. And I've just said earlier, the new skill sets will assist us as we face a very changing environment in terms of our road and highway networks. But I want to focus really on something that perhaps is where does all this kick off from and how do we get to the point that we're at, such a poor representation of people from different age groups, gender and BNME. Well, I think the problem really starts with our school cohort. On the left-hand side, and again, these are average, roughly, annual numbers. Any year of students at secondary school, there's probably about 650,000 of those particular pupils. And that particular stage of their careers, for whatever reason, be that the school wants to get good exam results in some subjects, or hasn't got the skills teaching-wise to push people towards some of the science and STEM subjects, we do lose over half of those people, potential candidates, by the time we reach the age of 16. When they're taking GCSEs, half of them are really already gone and have gone off to other areas. Again, we've lost that particular activity. When we squeeze the pipeline to the next level, you see that the 300,000 becomes 30,000. And some people do go into apprenticeships and vocational work. But again, that is a significant loss in the way that the industry has attract people who will come into and work with us for their career. Further in higher education, the squeeze gets even more. By the time we've got past post higher education, we've got less than 9,000 people in the UK working in engineering. And I'm talking here about engineering that covers all aspects from biomedicine to physics to highways and civil. So is the problem one of the schools? Is it one of the teachers? Is it our own problem in not getting the message across to those sorts of people? Is a question we keep asking ourselves, don't really seem to be able to get the answers to avert this particular pipeline issue. I did mention something else about when we recruit people, and it's something that perhaps is a little bit more controversial, but a lot of us suffer from what you might call unconscious bias. And there are lots of online activities to test whether you have unconscious bias or not. But some people do hold beliefs about people, whether it's their physical skill or their background or whatever, that automatically turn them off from being part of their industry. And I think we've got to be aware it's far more prevalent in our industry than is we'd want to mention. I'll park it because I don't think I'm not qualified to talk about unconscious bias as a scientific subject. But I think when you are looking at bringing people into the industry, sometimes first impressions may not be the right attitude to take. As you look forward to the 2020s, we're having to deal with the post-COVID issue, and we say post-COVID in the sense that it was almost out of our skins now, but in fact it's probably not. The change in weather patterns, whether you call that climate change, whether you call it some man-made effect, or however you deal with that particular process, we are demonstrating in, say, in America today, ridiculously strange weather patterns, huge fires, with huge flooding in some parts of the world, severe storms and all sorts of other major one-off challenges. Funding's changed. Funding that funds our processes has gone the traditional way of handing us money every year, a different way that we deal with bidding and whatever for funding. Money's been made available for HS2 over a long period of time. Road schemes are only probably funded on an annual basis, at best up to 5 years. We face the challenge of new materials, new technology. All the time, new technology is growing at a faster rate than the industry can cope with. And have we got the right people to be able to deal with that particular new technology? Not only climate change, but the whole environmental agenda, green agenda is quite significant and quite important. We are moving towards making a much more carbon neutral society. And that does affect how roads and highways are constructed. One of the effects of COVID-19 has been the move towards different patterns of traveling to and from work. The use of equipment like we're using today, Zoom and Teams and other online conference facilities, have changed the way that people travel around. It's also changed the way that people work. And is this modal shift something that will simply just bounce back to what it was last year, or will it be something that we'll see as a different way of developing our movements and our interactivity in the future? Active travel, an issue that, again, regarding public transport, which has had a bad time over the last 6 months or so, is really struggling to get back to pre-COVID levels, and one wonders whether the patterns that existed then in commuter travel will ever return. And of course, we've got the increase in use of electric vehicles, dare I say it, autonomous vehicles, and all those sort of remotely controlled activities. Again, will change the way that our road networks are managed. I've got a couple of short videos that I'd like to slip in now, just to sort of say these are the people who, in my opinion, we may need to have a look at. Certainly the technological changes that we face in the future will not require as many of the traditional skills we've had in the past. And maybe we'll be organising things on a much more remote basis than we previously did. Thank you for that, and 2 seconds to watch this video. We will take some questions towards you.
Autonomous Intersection Management, Traffic Control for the Future, a project from the University of Texas at Austin. Most intersections today are controlled by traffic signals, stop signs, or roundabouts. However, even when people do follow these protocols, intersections are the source of much traffic congestion and many accidents. Even though they take up a small percentage of the roadways, roughly 1/4 of all accidents and 1/3 of all fatal accidents occur at intersections. It is now apparent that autonomous cars are well on their way to becoming a reality. At first, they will need to follow the same intersection control protocols that were designed for people. But this project considers, once most cars on the road are autonomous, whether we can do better than that by way of an AI-based coordination mechanism. In this research, we introduce a new multi-agent intersection control scheme specifically designed for autonomous vehicles. By utilizing much more of the intersection at any given time than traffic signals and stop signs, the AIM reservation protocol has the potential to dramatically reduce congestion and therefore fuel usage. By eliminating the need for a lot of deceleration and acceleration, harmful emissions can be dramatically reduced as well. AIM relies on dedicated short-range communication, or DSRC, to allow autonomous cars to communicate with a server at the intersection called the intersection manager. Conceptually, the intersection manager and each car is an autonomous agent in a multi-agent system. One technical challenge of the research is to design a communication protocol between the agents that both ensures that cars can get through the intersection quickly and, most importantly, guarantees that there will be no collisions as long as there are no mechanical failures and the cars follow the protocol. The intersection manager calculates the car's proposed trajectory based on the expected driver-agent behavior and compares it to a reservation table storing past requests. As long as all the space-time a car needs for its path is unclaimed, the intersection manager guarantees its safe passage through the intersection at the proposed time. It is the car's responsibility to arrive at the appointed time and velocity. If a reservation is denied, the car must slow down and request a later reservation. This basic scheme has now been expanded to deal gracefully with a mix of autonomous and human drivers, and to use vehicle-to-vehicle communication at low-traffic intersections. Our initial research on AIM was conducted entirely in simulation. A common reaction upon first view is that it looks too scary or that it would never work on real cars. We therefore set out to test AIM on a real autonomous car. Our autonomous car Marvin was initially designed for the DARPA Grand Challenge and Urban Challenge in cooperation with Austin Robot Technology. This clip shows it navigating a conventional intersection controlled by a stop sign at the Urban Challenge. We use Marvin now to test whether AIM can work in the real world. Specifically, in order to configure AIM to leave sufficient space between vehicles, we need to know how precisely autonomous cars can be expected to predict their arrival times at intersections. This portion of the video shows how we can test AIM with just one autonomous vehicle in a mixed reality setup. Looking from the outside, you wouldn't know why the car is stopping or proceeding through the intersection. However, by looking at the screen, you can follow when Marvin has a reservation to proceed. Here you see a grid of intersections controlled by AIM. We have recently made the simulation code open source so that other researchers can build upon our results. It is available from the project website.
As the energy transition becomes a reality, imagine a road able to harvest solar energy and produce the electricity we so desperately need. After 5 years of research, in partnership with the National Institute for Solar Energy, Colas, a world leader in road construction, now presents Wattway, the first ever photovoltaic road surface in the world. Wattway provides a local source of clean, renewable energy. The panels are inserted in the road surface and can bear all types of vehicle traffic. Wattway supplies electricity for street lights, furniture, buildings, as well as shops and businesses. Last but not least, Wattway is also a solution for isolated, off-grid areas. There are so many applications we can imagine together. Wattway. Let's pave the way to tomorrow's energy.
Right, sorry for that. We'll do a bit of a false start there with the technology. This is Richard. Thank you very much for that, your input there. It's really give a very clear indication of the breadth of the issues around skills and also diversity. And again, like the other presentations are showing, it's multifaceted in terms of some of the issues that start to impact on it. We look at technology, we look at innovation, we look at environmental issues as well that are changing the face of the sector. We've had a number of questions that have come in, so I think maybe we just press on with those and then see where they take us. The first question that's come in is asked about how does the UK compare with other countries with people entering the engineering professions? If other countries are actually managing to fill these vacancies more effectively, what are they doing differently? Are there lessons to be learned? Do we actually even have that data?
I think it is more anecdotal, George, but what I would say was that the respect that many other countries give to engineers is greater than perhaps it would be in this country. I think a career in engineering, if you were a German or an Italian, is regarded slightly higher than if you are a United Kingdom engineer. So you start from a much greater image base and a respect for people who have those engineering skills. And I think that sort of goes back to the image problem we started to describe very much in one of the earlier videos. You don't regard engineer as having a significant value in this country at the moment.
Deeply ironic, the home of the Industrial Revolution doesn't value engineering. It really is quite a dreadful perspective.
I always come back, George, to the fact that who are our engineering heroes? We don't have a Brian Cox in engineering. Who have we got? We've got Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who died quite a few years ago now. He's hardly an inspiration for the modern society. We do need a hero, if you like, someone who can be a talent scout for the industry. I think we're struggling with that at the moment.
A valid point. I think a man in a top hat with a cigar with a whole load of chains behind him and the most frequently used photograph of him or image of him is hardly likely to encourage people. But there we go, we have got what we've got. I think there's maybe something worth exploring a bit further and maybe look at that outside of the conference and see whether we can link together with some of our engineering societies with ones abroad to see how they address issues around schools, because that's one of the other questions that come in. And it's quite combatively worded, actually, using skills language, of course. It says, are schools competent to encourage young people into the sector? Do schools understand the sector, and do they need to be incentivised?
I think just asking that question, it answers itself almost, doesn't it? The easy route for schools at the moment, who are really challenged to produce good results, is to assist students to achieve high grades in subjects that are slightly more easier to teach. Whether that's at secondary school or A-level or university, I think that's been a problem throughout the United Kingdom. I'm trying to be diplomatic in my response to this process.
I think also,
in fact, we haven't got the skills of teachers, particularly at the ages of 11, 12, 13, when kids are making their minds up. Again, we need some inspiration in that particular process. Subjects are very dry, taught very traditionally, and in a sense more difficult to do because they require more technique and more ability. And I think the school system is not being used to generate the economic output of the country in the way that it could be. I want to be very careful how I take this process to my role with the Institute for Apprenticeships, because I think work is being done there to make qualifications and training a much more relevant subject. But unfortunately, that doesn't get picked up until the age of 16. And I do worry that we've lost, as I showed in that particular pipeline, so many of the potential students who are lost in the early stages of education. Yes, make the choice at 16, that's absolutely fine. But when they're making choices at 11 and 12, when they really don't fully understand, I think there's a big problem with our skills and careers service.
This is a challenge because you consider the millions of pounds, the hundreds of millions of pounds that have been invested in technical schools up and down the country. Yet, I think, 5-6 years into that regime, we've still not seen a fundamental change in the number of engineering graduates. And that leads on to the next question, which I think is quite a perceptive one. It says quite bluntly, we're not going to get 1 million engineers. So there's no point in repeating the fact that these projections say we need 1 million engineers. We're just not going to get them. So what are we going to do? The question is, do we need to be more creative? Is it about robotics, new processes, or is it about more simplified approaches to modular construction and repair? And I think there's maybe that's interesting because we see more modular construction in new roads, certainly. What's your take in respect to that in terms of progress that's being made there?
Well, I think, I try to highlight the fact that skill sets we'll need in the future will not be what they were in the past. We need to take advantage of that particular process. And modelling traffic is very similar to computer games in many sort of ways. It's the same sort of techniques that are required. It's a bit sort of a reverse Grand Theft Auto, as it were, that you don't want the cars actually to crash rather than creating the sort of massive hazards. But the same skill set is required in that particular process. How to get that message across? To say that actually computer, IT, all that sort of skills will be used to manage our traffic, our movement, our modal activity in the future. That's sort of one particular area. And technology has improved the sector. It needs to improve it more. We still have people who perhaps we will need to dig trenches and lay cables and everything else of that particular sort. So we do need that broad spectrum. We need to take advantage of the fact that there are people interested in other skills that we could use. And even psychological skills, people who have a medical activity, but how does behaviour affect people using our networks? So there's a massive range of work to move into. I think it's a matter of just clearing the current decks and just getting more imaginative sort of teaching into the particular subject areas that we've got.
Of course, I mean, you cite video games and the likes of that. The more advanced use of robotics and mechanisation actually removes the need for people to dig trenches, because we actually could use machines to do that are controlled by individuals, but they might not even need to be on site.
Yeah.
I mean, to use a very pejorative example, we can bomb countries remotely from a building in Lincolnshire without any pilots being risked. Well, we can surely dig trenches at the side of the M1 without operatives being risked, and you change the perspective people have of the job. They don't have to get mud on their boots. And maybe that's the type of thing that we need to be innovating on, is innovating on our own ideas. There's a point that's been raised here, and it was raised here in the discussion we were having earlier on, so I'll incorporate it into the questions. Within the COVID crisis, we've seen some very highly technical and highly skilled areas of UK industry suffer disproportionately. I'm talking about the aerospace industry, which is a landmark industry in terms of skills and encouraging younger people to come into an industry, something that we as a highway sector have singularly failed to do over the last few years. Is there a role there for some of the institutions to actually start creating links so that people that are losing their jobs in the aerospace industry, we should be linking to government to support skills transfers and competency transfers into the highway sector? Because that not only brings in skilled people, but it brings in a cultural transformation as well. And it brings a culture of some just-in-time culture, but a high-tech culture. So I'm actually putting that down as a bit of a challenge, actually, which I'm willing to work with IHE on as well, that actually maybe we should be going to government saying, right, what are you going to do to support us to get those skills and get those skilled people back into work before those skills bleed abroad and we have a brain drain?
I agree. I think looking at companies like Rolls-Royce, I mean, when you've been to engineering fairs and previous activity, you know, they are the go-to places for the young aspirants. I mean, they want to work for those sorts of companies. They see them as being, you know, world-leading companies, world-class. Those companies will have to adapt, and I know they will adapt because they have that sort of approach. So it's working with the employers and government to say, well, actually, the skill sets are easily transferable, but we just need to adapt them to what I call the more modern situation. And yeah, I think that's an approach that we should be considering quite carefully.
There's potentially two approaches there, of course. There's actually transferring the skills, and there's maybe also a bit of opportunity there to encourage some of these businesses in the supply chain to actually refocus their operations. And I know that might not be a welcome challenge to some of the businesses within the sector, but actually it could help us with that step change in approach or attitude that we need.
Well, your own background, George, in road marketing, so I'm going to have to look at the way that you know, the remote lining machines have introduced in the industry and will develop more and more. You know, surely someone who, let's describe it, can build a remote satellite that can land on Mars and carry some activity out, surely it can be developed to use a machine that can either dig a pothole or repair a whatever, or lay some more complicated road markings and the like. I mean, it's the same activity, it's the end product that's perhaps slightly different, but the same technology could be used in many of those particular areas. I think you said that earlier on, and I agree that's where we should be looking to. Perhaps we sort of sit a bit too compartmentalized in the way we approach this sort of issue. And it does worry me, and I'll just sort of make a sort of more general point that one of the challenges in my work with the Apprenticeship Institute is trying to prevent compartmentalism of subjects at a very early age, because I think broader skills are probably better taught now to kids between 16 and 21, rather than very tight and narrowed skills, which some of the bigger players are looking for. And I don't particularly think that's the right strategy. I think we need a basic broad engineering background, and then we specialize as we get a little bit older. But I'm quite worried that we're doing that too early in some subject areas. But I think it reflects the fact that as we move forward, we all have to adapt to new technology. I mean, I don't know how many people have ever using level books, something that, you know, that I did, or draw with an ink pen anymore. I mean, you learnt skills at 16, 17, which you no longer use. We've all had to adapt over the years. But you need a broad engineering base to be able to make that adaptation easier. And if you particularly tighten down into one sort of narrow area that, you know, may disappear off the syllabus in a few years' time.
I think that raises an interesting point and dovetails into a question we've got here. The question was, are government structures flexible enough to adapt quickly to skills needs? Now, maybe some of that reflects as well on the issue you've just raised about is government encouraging a broad approach to apprenticeships, or is it allowing too much of a narrow, compartmentalised tramline approach that says you can do this job but you'll never do another job? Because surely that runs contrary to not just what we should be achieving, but what government says it wants to achieve.
Without naming names and looking at various particular activity, I do worry that, and this was mentioned very much in the first sort of set of presentations, we need SMEs involved in this particular process. SMEs do need broader based engineers and technicians. If the larger companies, whether it be in any sort of engineering, you know, dictate the pattern, we will get very highly skilled single activity individuals, and that won't do anybody any good in the future. So government is allowing industry to set its own standards, and it should be complimented for that. It's not dictating what should be done. All of industry has to be involved, and I'm not entirely sure that all of industry can spare the time at the moment to be involved, but it has to. Otherwise, it will not have a future in a few years' time. There's some really dedicated people from SMEs who are working on this system, but there are also some major companies that are just moving the tide in a direction that perhaps suits them rather than suits the overall industry itself. Again, education sector is not involved, whether it be further education, school education, or university education. So again, we're setting standards, and we're not entirely sure whether the teachers, the lecturers can deliver those particular standards because they haven't got the skill sets either. So, all right to be given our own autonomy and get on and set our own standards, but we do need to take the rest of the organisations with us.
it's a very pertinent point, because it links into what we're going to be talking about this afternoon in terms of sustainability, and to an extent collaboration as well, but the sustainability of the sector and the sustainability of the industry. You can understand companies in financially challenged times want to protect their investment when they're training somebody, but the industry itself will only be truly sustainable, and its deliverables will only be truly sustainable if people can move through the industry and broaden their skills base all the time. Otherwise, we're just going to be in this constant cycle of problems. I think when we come back to the round table slightly later on this morning, I think maybe we want to revisit that point about a link between LCRIG's SME agenda and promoting skills, because I think there's a really strong discussion point, I think, perhaps with the value there, as I say, feeding into collaboration and also into sustainable business and sustainable approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I do think if LCRIG want to get involved in setting educational standards, that would be a massive move forward to bring someone from that part of the sector into the debate, because skill sets needed there, they have to be adaptable. I mean, the people that are coming from local government have to be able to spin 10 plates at once. No matter how you play this, you can't be an expert in a very tight subject any longer. You have to become a master of a number of trades, and that broad engineering discipline needs to be taught at the right time to produce the outcomes we want in the future.
Okay, well, thank you, Richard, for answering those questions. There are an interesting range of questions that have been asked. And again, it's showing this broad general direction of travel, that's everything being linked together. Now, one of the things that Richard touched upon in his presentation, and also is something that's of real importance to the sector, is actually providing an opportunity for people to learn, and within the current circumstances, that learning doesn't get distracted or sidetracked by the current circumstances around COVID. And we have to get to a point where we have a word from our sponsors. So we're just going to look at a short presentation here, which actually looks at the capacity to develop virtual training and distance learning that actually is practical and isn't overawing. It doesn't overawe candidates. It actually gives them practical, detailed support in developing new skills. So I'll just pass you over to Gary here, so he can just introduce that. Following that presentation, we'll move to a roundtable discussion. And so if you've got points you want to raise from things that have been discussed earlier, please submit those now. We've got a number already, but don't let that put you off. Please bring them into the fore, and we'll actually try and get some kind of rounded view of the presentations we've had this morning.
So thank you, George. I really appreciate it. And there's been incredible correlation actually between those two subjects we looked at this morning. So starting off with productivity and economy, and then moving to skills and diversity. A lot of insight, and I was excuse me, just reflecting on what I'm viewed as when I'm a grey-haired filing cabinet. Fast moving forward, it was a bit of a culture shock to me to find that I'm actually the age my father was when I came into the industry, and these things creep up on you. So it's 26. I came into the industry at the age of 21, mostly by default. I entered through the construction industry as an architect, and that was in the early 90s, and it bombed. Then construction industry bombed, and it was a matter of trying to find something else to do. But right from the inception, training has been something that's very much front of my mind. I've seen the value of it both in my own course, but in other people, how you can very much exponentially improve what value you can add to a sector. And so I've been thinking for quite a while on how we can scale that up. And clearly with the pandemic and everything going online, I've been thinking, is there not a way we can leverage everyone's more technical ability at various stages, I know, but here we are today with 250 people on an e-conference, and we can cope with these sort of things. So I commissioned a team to look at how we can do that in a virtual virtual arena. We actually do a lot of training here at MEON internally, so all our staff are trained There are 2 virtual sessions a week and one practical one every month. And we also offer training courses for people who come here. But naturally, that's only got a reach and it's got a limit in terms of its scalability. So, like I said, commissioned our marketing and IT team to see how they could make that more electronic. So I'm just going to share my screen here to show you what we've developed and whether it's of any value. And I'm really, I guess today I'm not looking for praise, I'm more looking for feedback in terms of how we can, how the congregation here can make some suggestions, give us some input, what we can add to it. So anyone just navigates to our to the website, they can go click on the Training Academy at the top. When you go to the Training Academy, I'll walk through this quite quickly. We got this platform here, it's an online platform, we can get started, and there's some free courses. So we want to improve and add to these free courses. And then you can actually, there's some courses here for sale, and we're obviously offering these as on discounted rate for those, for different reasons, for those who maybe have bought a machine. But the platform is very much scaled in either direction. So we're thinking on there's practical areas, there's technical areas, there's even learning in terms of industry history. It could be on new shared practice, anything can go on this platform. So when you roll on, this is the actual, it's not dissimilar from anyone who's tried LinkedIn Learning. It's not dissimilar from what you might see on that platform. You've got a video, you've got a run through modules. At the end of it, you get a certificate with, so I'll just play a little bit of this now. I hope the sound might not come through, but you can get the feeling. So the point was, at the end of every module, once you've completed that, you go to the next bit, and there's a loading here is a simple test, and you can't go on to the next module until you've passed these questions. I think there's about 4 or 5 questions here. My computer loads, and let's not let that hold us up though. If we go, eventually you get down to the end of the course, and you can download a certificate. I don't know if my certificate's right here, but it's all on one platform. And so you've got the basics courses, in the course module, you've got the different modules set out here. So I really are looking for feedback, either on this Q&A on the session or post event, or post e-conference today. Let me know how you think it might be scaled up, and we might be able to use that in your arena, your responsibilities, be it as a professional, as a contractor, as an asset owner, specifier, or whatever you come from. We'd love to be able to add value. So